A janitor ordered a simple woman to clean floors as punishment for spilling coffee, completely unaware that she was the CEO's daughter visiting incognito. What happened next changed everything at Morrison Industries forever. Sometimes the most powerful people choose to walk among us unnoticed, and sometimes a single act of cruelty reveals more about character than years of careful observation. Sarah Chen stepped carefully through the gleaming marble lobby of Morrison Industries, her worn canvas sneakers silent against the polished stone. The early morning light filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across a space designed to intimidate. Everything here spoke of power and precision, from the towering steel sculptures to the reception desk that seemed carved from a single piece of black granite. She clutched a small paper cup of coffee from the corner bodega, steam rising faintly from the plastic lid. Her clothes were simple, unremarkable, a faded denim jacket over dark jeans and a plain white t-shirt. No jewelry, no designer labels, nothing that would mark her as different from the hundreds of employees who passed through these doors each day. That was exactly how she wanted it. At 26, she had spent most of her adult life trying to understand the company her father had built from nothing, the empire that would one day be hers to inherit or destroy. But she couldn't learn what she needed to know from boardroom presentations or quarterly reports. She needed to see how people behaved when they thought no one important was watching. The elevator chimed softly as it arrived, and she stepped inside alongside a cluster of early arrivals. Office workers in press suits, maintenance staff in company uniforms, a few executives already checking their phones with the focused intensity of people whose every minute was accounted for. No one looked at her. No one registered her presence. Perfect. She pressed the button for the 15th floor, where the marketing department buzzed with the constant energy of campaigns and deadlines. That's where she planned to spend the day, observing from the edges, learning how the machine really worked when the spotlight wasn't on it. The elevator lurched slightly as it began its ascent, and her coffee sloshed against the lid. A single drop escaped, falling to the pristine floor with a sound that seemed amplified in the enclosed space. She looked down at the tiny brown stain on the otherwise immaculate surface and felt a flutter of anxiety. It was such a small thing, barely visible, but in a building where perfection was the standard, even the smallest flaw felt enormous. The elevator continued its smooth climb, and she tried to convince herself that the spill was too minor to matter. Surely the cleaning crew would take care of it during their regular rounds. Surely no one would even notice such a tiny mark among all the foot traffic of a busy morning. The doors opened with another soft chime, and the other passengers filed out, leaving her alone for the final stretch to the 15th floor. She shifted her weight nervously, the coffee cup suddenly feeling heavier in her hands. When the doors opened again, she stepped into a hallway that hummed with the quiet efficiency of a well-oiled machine. Phones rang, keyboards clicked, voices murmured behind partially closed doors. This was the sound of productivity, of people working toward something larger than themselves. She took a deep breath and started walking toward the marketing department, ready to begin her day of invisible observation. Behind her, the elevator doors closed with a whisper, carrying her small accident down to other floors, other people, other consequences she couldn't yet imagine. Marcus Rodriguez had been cleaning Morrison Industries for 12 years, ever since the company moved into this gleaming tower in the heart of the financial district. 12 years of scrubbing floors that cost more per square foot than most people made in a month. 12 years of polishing surfaces that reflected the faces of people who looked right through him. 12 years of being invisible in plain sight. He pushed his cart through the marble lobby, the wheels rolling smoothly across stone that he had buffed to a mirror shine just hours before. The early morning sun was already painting geometric patterns across the floor, and he could see every fingerprint on the glass doors, every scuff mark on the baseboards, every speck of dust that had dared to settle overnight. Perfectionism wasn't just his job, it was his identity. In a building full of people who moved millions of dollars with phone calls and handshakes, he was the one who made sure their environment reflected their ambitions. The elevator chimed, and he looked up to see the doors opening on the ground floor. Inside, a small brown stain marked the otherwise spotless surface: coffee. Fresh, still slightly wet around the edges. His jaw tightened as he guided his cart into the elevator and knelt to examine the damage. It wasn't large, maybe the size of a quarter, but it might as well have been a canyon carved into his professional pride. Someone had spilled coffee in his elevator and walked away without a second thought. Someone had decided that their time was more valuable than his effort. Someone had shown exactly what they thought of the work he did and the space he maintained. He pulled out his cleaning supplies with practiced efficiency, working to remove the stain before it could set permanently into the floor. The coffee came up easily enough, but the insult lingered. In 12 years, he had learned to recognize the hierarchy that governed this building. Executives who dropped trash without breaking stride, knowing someone else would pick it up. Middle managers who left meeting rooms in chaos, confident that the cleaning crew would restore order. Support staff who treated common areas like their personal space, secure in the knowledge that any mess they made would disappear overnight. But this felt different. This felt personal. Someone had been careless with something he cared about, and they hadn't even bothered to clean up after themselves. As the elevator climbed toward the upper floors, carrying him toward his daily rounds, Marcus found himself thinking about respect. About what it meant to share a space with other people. About the difference between those who cleaned up after themselves and those who expected others to do it for them. The elevator stopped at the 15th floor, and he stepped out into the marketing department's hallway. Somewhere on this floor was the person who had spilled coffee in his elevator. Somewhere nearby was someone who thought their small messes were someone else's responsibility. He was going to find them. The marketing department of Morrison Industries occupied the entire 15th floor. A sprawling maze of cubicles, conference rooms, and glass-walled offices where campaigns were born and brands were built. The air hummed with creative energy and barely controlled chaos, a sharp contrast to the sterile perfection of the executive floors above. Sarah had found a quiet corner near the break room where she could observe without drawing attention. She sat at an empty desk that belonged to someone who was apparently out sick, nursing her coffee and watching the morning routine unfold around her. People hurried past with portfolios and laptops, their conversations a rapid-fire mix of client names, deadlines, and budget concerns. This was the engine room of her father's empire, the place where abstract corporate goals became concrete marketing strategies. She was learning more about the company in one morning than she had in years of formal presentations. The creative teams worked with a passion that surprised her, staying late to perfect campaigns for products they might never use themselves. The account managers juggled impossible demands from clients who seemed to change their minds hourly. The junior staff worked with the desperate energy of people trying to prove themselves worthy of advancement. And through it all, the support staff moved like ghosts, emptying trash cans and refilling supplies with the invisible efficiency that kept everything running smoothly. She had just started to relax into her role as observer when she heard the wheels of a maintenance cart rolling down the hallway. The sound was rhythmic, purposeful, getting closer with each passing second. She glanced toward the break room and felt her stomach drop. Through the glass walls, she could see a janitor methodically checking each area, his movements sharp with barely contained frustration. He was looking for something. Or someone. Sarah set down her coffee cup with hands that had begun to tremble slightly. The spill in the elevator had been so small, so insignificant. Surely it couldn't have caused this kind of reaction. Surely no one would care about something so minor in a building where millions of dollars changed hands every day. But as the sound of the cart grew closer, she began to understand that she had made a fundamental error in judgment. She had assumed that her small accident would go unnoticed because she had been thinking like the daughter of a CEO, someone whose messes were cleaned up quietly and without comment. She hadn't considered how that same spill might look to the person responsible for maintaining the space. She hadn't thought about what it meant to take pride in work that others took for granted. The cart stopped just outside the break room, and she heard the janitor's voice, calm but carrying an edge that made several nearby workers look up from their computers. "Excuse me," he said to a young woman carrying a stack of presentation boards. "I'm looking for whoever spilled coffee in the elevator this morning. Did you see anyone coming up from the lobby with a drink?" The woman shook her head quickly, clearly uncomfortable with the intensity in his voice. "Sorry, I take the stairs. Try asking around the break room. People always have coffee over there." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she realized the net was closing around her. She could leave, could slip away to another floor and disappear into the anonymity of the building. She could return to her father's executive suite and pretend this morning had never happened. But something kept her in place, a growing curiosity about what would happen next. She had come here to learn about the real dynamics of the company, about how people treated each other when they thought no one important was watching. Now she was about to get a lesson she hadn't expected. The cartwheels started moving again, coming directly toward her corner of the floor. In 30 seconds, maybe less, she would come face to face with a man whose professional pride she had unknowingly wounded. She would have to decide whether to reveal her identity or face the consequences of her carelessness as just another employee. The choice would teach her something about herself, about power, and about the responsibility that came with both. Marcus Rodriguez rounded the corner into the main work area of the marketing department with the focused determination of a detective following a crucial lead. His cart rolled smoothly beside him, every cleaning supply perfectly organized, every tool in its designated place. The contrast between his meticulous appearance and the barely controlled chaos around him was striking. While the marketing staff juggled multiple projects with papers scattered across desks and coffee cups balanced precariously near expensive equipment, Marcus moved through the space like a man who understood that order was the foundation of everything else. He had already questioned 3 people in the hallway, each conversation adding another piece to the puzzle. A delivery driver had seen a young woman with coffee entering the building around 7:30. A security guard had noticed someone taking the elevator to the 15th floor shortly after. An administrative assistant had mentioned seeing a stranger near the break room, someone who didn't quite fit the usual pattern of the morning rush. Now, as he surveyed the marketing department's main floor, his eyes were drawn to a woman sitting alone at a desk in the corner. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her clothes were casual but clean, the kind of outfit that suggested someone trying to blend in rather than stand out. And beside her, on the desk that clearly wasn't hers, sat a small paper coffee cup from the bodega across the street. Marcus felt a surge of vindication mixed with irritation. He had found his target. Sarah saw him coming and felt her throat tighten with anxiety. There was something in his posture, a kind of controlled intensity that suggested this confrontation was going to be more serious than she had anticipated. She could still leave, could claim she had a meeting somewhere else and disappear before he reached her. But she remained frozen in place, partly from curiosity and partly from a strange sense that running away would only make things worse. When Marcus stopped in front of her desk, the silence that followed seemed to stretch across the entire floor. Nearby conversations faltered as people sensed the tension building between the janitor and the stranger in their midst. "You spilled coffee in elevator number 3 this morning," Marcus said quietly. It wasn't a question. His voice carried the weight of absolute certainty, and his eyes never left her face as he waited for her response. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "It was just a drop," she said softly. "I didn't think anyone would notice." Marcus's expression hardened. "You didn't think anyone would notice." He repeated her words slowly, as if testing their weight. "You dropped something on a floor that I spend hours every day keeping perfect, and you didn't think it was worth your time to clean it up." The accusation hung in the air between them, and Sarah realized that she had stumbled into something much larger than a spilled coffee. This wasn't just about a small stain on an elevator floor. This was about respect, about responsibility, about the invisible labor that kept their world functioning smoothly. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it. "I should have cleaned it up." "Should have," Marcus agreed. "But you didn't. You decided that was someone else's job." He gestured toward his cart, toward the supplies and equipment that represented hours of daily effort. "You decided that your small mess was my responsibility." Around them, the marketing department had grown noticeably quieter. People were still working, still typing and talking and moving through their daily routines, but there was an undercurrent of attention focused on the confrontation playing out in the corner. Some watched openly, others stole glances between tasks, but everyone seemed to sense that something significant was happening. Sarah felt the weight of their attention and realized that her response in this moment would define how she was seen by everyone around her. She could apologize again, could try to explain that she truly hadn't meant any disrespect. She could offer to help clean something, to make amends for her carelessness. Or she could do what many people in her position might do: remind this janitor that she was a customer in this building, someone whose presence here was voluntary and valuable. The choice felt enormous, pregnant with implications she was only beginning to understand. "I understand that you're upset," she said carefully. "And you have every right to be. What I did was inconsiderate." Marcus studied her face, looking for signs of sincerity or manipulation. He had heard apologies before, countless expressions of regret that dissolved the moment the person making them was out of sight. But there was something in her voice, a quality of genuine remorse that made him pause. Still, an apology wasn't enough. Actions had consequences, and lessons needed to be learned. "You understand that I'm upset," he said. "Good. Now you're going to understand what it means to fix your mistakes." He reached into his cart and pulled out a mop and a spray bottle filled with cleaning solution. The tools looked well used but perfectly maintained, and he held them out toward her with the solemnity of someone presenting evidence in a courtroom. "You're going to clean every elevator in this building," he said quietly. "All 8 of them. You're going to scrub the floors, wipe down the walls, and polish the buttons until they shine. You're going to understand what it takes to maintain the space you so casually messed up." The demand fell like a stone into still water, sending ripples of shock through everyone within earshot. Several people stopped working entirely, their attention now focused completely on the unprecedented scene unfolding before them. A janitor was ordering someone to clean, and not just clean a little spill, but perform actual manual labor as punishment for a minor transgression. Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat. The mop and spray bottle hung in the air between them, waiting for her response. She could refuse, could assert her position as a visitor to the building, could demand to speak to a supervisor. She could reveal her identity and watch this man realize that he had just tried to discipline the daughter of the company's founder and CEO. But as she looked into Marcus's eyes, she saw something that gave her pause. This wasn't about power or hierarchy or putting someone in their place. This was about pride in work, about the dignity of labor, about what it meant to take responsibility for your actions. This was about a man who had spent 12 years maintaining spaces for people who barely acknowledged his existence, finally finding someone willing to listen to what he had to say about respect and consequence. Sarah reached out and took the mop and spray bottle from his hands. The tools felt heavier than she had expected, and she could smell the faint chemical scent of the cleaning solution. Around her, the marketing department buzzed with whispered conversations and barely concealed amazement. Some people looked horrified at the spectacle. Others seemed fascinated by the unexpected drama playing out in their workplace. "Where do I start?" she asked quietly. Marcus felt a flicker of surprise at her compliance, but his expression remained stern. "Elevator Bank A," he said. "Ground floor to the 20th. Work your way up, 1 floor at a time. Don't miss the corners. Don't skip the door tracks. And don't come back until every surface is as clean as it was when I finished it yesterday." He paused, studying her face for any sign that she might change her mind or try to negotiate a lesser punishment. When he saw only resignation and determination, he added, "I'll be checking your work. If it's not done properly, you'll start over." Sarah nodded and stood, gathering the cleaning supplies with hands that trembled slightly from adrenaline and anxiety. As she walked toward the elevators, she could feel the eyes of the entire marketing department following her progress. By lunchtime, word of what had happened would spread through the building like wildfire. By the end of the day, everyone at Morrison Industries would know the story of the woman who had been forced to clean elevators as punishment for spilling coffee. What they wouldn't know, what only she could know as she pressed the button to call the first elevator, was that this punishment was about to become the most valuable education of her life. The elevator doors opened with their familiar soft chime, and Sarah stepped inside with her cleaning supplies, ready to learn what her father's company looked like from the bottom up. Sarah stepped into the first elevator with a sense of crossing a threshold she couldn't uncross. The familiar enclosed space looked different now. No longer just a convenient way to move between floors but a testament to someone's daily dedication. She could see the attention to detail in every polished surface, the way the buttons gleamed without a single fingerprint, the precise alignment of the safety notices and inspection certificates on the walls. This wasn't just functional space, it was someone's craft. She sprayed the cleaning solution across the floor and began to mop, her movements awkward at first but gradually finding a rhythm. The chemical smell was stronger than she had expected, sharp and astringent, nothing like the pleasant scents of the household cleaner she was familiar with. This was industrial-strength solution designed for high-traffic commercial spaces, and using it required a precision she was only beginning to appreciate. As she worked, people entered and exited the elevator around her, their reactions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed amusement. A few executives looked annoyed at the inconvenience, clearly frustrated that their usual smooth transit between floors had been interrupted by someone actually cleaning the space they use dozens of times each day. Others seemed fascinated by the novelty of witnessing manual labor in their white-collar environment. Most simply ignored her, stepping carefully around her equipment with the practiced indifference of people accustomed to service workers being invisible. Sarah found herself studying these reactions with growing insight. Each person's response revealed something about their character, about how they viewed the people who maintained their world. Some offered polite nods or quiet thanks, acknowledging her work with simple courtesy. Others acted as if she were a piece of furniture, an obstacle to navigate rather than a person performing a service. A few made comments to their companions, their voices carrying just enough to ensure she could hear their opinions about the unusual situation. By the time she finished the first elevator, her back ached from bending and stretching to reach every surface. Her hands, soft from years of office work and academic study, had begun to redden from the chemicals and friction. But she also felt something unexpected, a small sense of accomplishment at seeing the space restored to pristine condition. The floor reflected the overhead lights perfectly, the walls gleamed without a streak or smudge, and the buttons responded to her touch with the smooth precision of well-maintained machinery. The second elevator presented new challenges. Someone had tracked mud across the floor, leaving a pattern of dried footprints that required scrubbing rather than simple mopping. The walls bore the subtle marks of thousands of hands and shoulders, stains so faint they were invisible to casual observation but obvious once she began cleaning them away. She worked methodically, paying attention to corners and crevices that she had never noticed before, understanding for the first time the complexity of maintaining something that looked effortless. Word of her punishment had spread through the building with the speed of digital gossip. People began riding elevators they didn't need, curious to witness the spectacle of someone actually being held accountable for a minor transgression. Some lingered in lobbies and hallways, pretending to check their phones while watching her work. Others made elaborate detours past the elevator banks, hoping to catch a glimpse of the woman who had somehow attracted the attention of the usually invisible maintenance staff. Sarah became aware of the attention gradually, noticing the unusual number of people who seemed to have business near the elevators, the conversations that stopped when she appeared, the photos being taken discreetly from across lobbies. She realized that she had become a story, an anecdote that people would share about the day they saw someone forced to clean elevators for spilling coffee. But as she continued working, moving from elevator to elevator with growing skill and efficiency, she began to understand that the real story was much deeper than workplace drama. Marcus Rodriguez appeared periodically to check her progress, his inspections thorough and uncompromising. He would run his finger along door tracks she thought she had cleaned perfectly, point out streaks on walls that looked spotless to her untrained eye, demonstrate techniques for reaching corners and crevices that she had missed entirely. His criticism was never cruel, but it was relentless, holding her to the same standards he maintained for himself. "You missed the ventilation grate," he would say, pointing to a barely visible accumulation of dust. "Start over." Or, "The floor still has streaks. You're pushing the dirt around instead of picking it up. Try again." Each correction stung her pride, but she began to appreciate the expertise behind his demands. This wasn't busy work or arbitrary punishment. This was training, an education in the skills and standards required to maintain commercial space to professional levels. By the fourth elevator, she had developed a systematic approach, working from top to bottom, treating each surface with the attention it required. By the sixth, her movements had become fluid and efficient, her eyes trained to spot imperfections that would have been invisible to her that morning. As she started on the seventh elevator, Sarah realized that something fundamental had shifted in how she moved through the building. She noticed things that had been invisible before: scuff marks on baseboards, fingerprints on glass doors, the way different types of shoes left different patterns on the floors. She began to see the building not as a static environment but as a living space that required constant attention to maintain its appearance of effortless perfection. The work was harder than she had anticipated, but it was also strangely satisfying. Each completed elevator represented a small victory, a space restored to its intended condition through her own effort. She found herself taking pride in the quality of her work, checking and rechecking surfaces to ensure they met the standards Marcus had established. When she finally reached the eighth and final elevator, Sarah realized that the day had transformed her understanding of both the building and herself. Her hands were red and raw, her back ached from hours of bending and stretching, and her clothes bore the stains of honest labor. But she had also discovered capabilities she didn't know she possessed, developed skills she had never needed before, and gained a perspective on her father's company that no boardroom presentation could have provided. Marcus appeared as she finished polishing the last set of buttons, his inspection more thorough than any of the previous ones. He checked every surface methodically, running his hands along walls and floors, testing the smoothness of door operation, examining corners and crevices with the attention of someone whose reputation depended on the quality of her work. When he finished, he stepped back and studied her face, looking for signs of resentment or defiance. Instead, he saw exhaustion mixed with something that looked like understanding. "You did good work," he said quietly. "Better than I expected." Sarah wiped her hands on the cleaning cloth and looked around the elevator one last time. It gleamed with the perfection she had learned to recognize and appreciate over the course of the day. "Thank you," she said, and meant it in ways that went far beyond gratitude for his approval of her cleaning. As they stood together in the spotless elevator, surrounded by the results of her labor and his teaching, Sarah realized that this encounter had changed something fundamental about how she understood the company she would one day inherit. She had learned about the dignity of maintenance work, the skill required to make difficult tasks look effortless, and the pride that came from taking responsibility for your environment. But more than that, she had learned about Marcus Rodriguez, about the 12 years he had spent maintaining spaces for people who rarely acknowledged his existence, about the professional standards he upheld even when no one was watching, and about the respect he deserved for work that made everything else possible. The elevator doors opened onto the ground floor lobby, where her day had begun with a small accident and a large misunderstanding. Now, as she gathered the cleaning supplies and prepared to return them to Marcus's cart, Sarah knew that she could never again walk through these doors without seeing the building and everyone who worked in it with different eyes. The lesson was complete, but its implications were just beginning to unfold. Sarah handed the mop and spray bottle back to Marcus with hands that bore the evidence of her day's education. Her palms were red from gripping the handle, her fingertips pruned from the cleaning solution, her nails harboring traces of the industrial soap she had learned to use with precision. The tools that had felt awkward and foreign that morning now felt familiar, extensions of skills she had developed through necessity and determination. Marcus accepted the equipment with a nod that carried more approval than his words had expressed. He had watched her work throughout the day, noting the way she had adapted to his corrections, the increasing quality of her technique, and the growing understanding in her eyes of what his job actually required. This wasn't the same woman who had dismissed her coffee spill as inconsequential. This was someone who had learned to see maintenance work as skilled labor deserving of respect. "Thank you," Sarah said, her voice carrying a weight of meaning that went far beyond courtesy. "For teaching me something I needed to learn." Marcus paused in his organizing of the cleaning supplies, struck by the sincerity in her tone. In 12 years of maintaining this building, he had received countless apologies from people who had made messes, but few had thanked him for the opportunity to understand his work. Most people saw cleaning as punishment, a degrading task to be avoided or delegated. She seemed to have grasped something deeper about the relationship between labor and dignity. "You earned it," he replied simply. "Not many people would have stuck with it the way you did." Around them, the afternoon shift was beginning to wind down. The lobby buzzed with the controlled energy of people preparing to leave, their conversations focused on evening plans and tomorrow's challenges. But Sarah noticed things she had missed that morning: the way the security guards monitored the space with professional attention, the efficiency with which the reception staff managed multiple tasks simultaneously, the quiet competence of the maintenance workers who kept everything functioning smoothly. She had gained new eyes for seeing the complexity of systems she had previously taken for granted. As she prepared to leave the building, Sarah realized that her identity remained unknown to Marcus and everyone else who had witnessed her day of education. She was still just a woman who had spilled coffee and been held accountable for her carelessness. The power to reveal herself, to transform this story from punishment into recognition, remained entirely in her hands. She could walk away and let the day stand as it was, a lesson learned and a debt paid. She could return tomorrow in her real capacity and pretend this encounter had never happened. Or she could choose a different path, one that honored what she had learned about the dignity of work and the people who performed it. Marcus began pushing his cart toward the service elevators, his day far from over despite the afternoon hour. There were floors to mop, offices to clean, and dozens of small maintenance tasks that would ensure the building opened tomorrow in the same pristine condition it had maintained today. His work was invisible to most people, but Sarah now understood the skill and dedication required to make it appear effortless. "Wait," she called, causing him to pause and turn back toward her. "Marcus, I need to tell you something." She took a breath, weighing her words carefully. "What you did today, holding me accountable for my mistake, was exactly right. And the way you maintain this building, the standards you uphold even when no one notices, that matters more than you might realize." Marcus studied her face, unsure where this conversation was leading but sensing its importance. "Everyone notices eventually," he said. "They just don't always admit it." "That's exactly what I mean," Sarah replied. "And it's something that needs to change." She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a business card, one of the simple white cards she had been carrying since her graduation from business school. But instead of handing it to him, she held it for a moment, considering the weight of revelation. "My name is Sarah Chen," she said quietly. "My father is David Chen, the founder and CEO of Morrison Industries. I came here today to learn about the company from a different perspective, and you gave me an education I'll never forget." The words hung in the air between them like a revelation that changed the fundamental nature of everything that had preceded it. Marcus felt his world tilt slightly as he processed the information, understanding suddenly that he had spent the day training the daughter of the man who owned the building, the company, and ultimately his job. But instead of fear or regret, he felt a strange sense of vindication. He had done what he believed was right, holding someone accountable for their actions regardless of their status or position. "Now I understand why you didn't complain," Marcus said slowly. "You could have stopped this any time." Sarah nodded. "I could have. But I'm glad I didn't. You taught me something important about responsibility and respect, and about the people who make this company actually function." She handed him the business card, but this time it wasn't an assertion of authority. It was an acknowledgement of connection, a bridge between their different worlds within the same building. Marcus took the card and read it carefully, his calloused fingers tracing the embossed letters of her name and title. "So what happens now?" he asked. "Do I get fired for making the boss's daughter mop floors?" Sarah smiled, and for the first time all day, it reached her eyes completely. "No, Marcus. What happens now is that I go upstairs and have a conversation with my father about the people who keep his company running and how we can do a better job of recognizing their contributions." She paused, looking around the lobby that gleamed with his daily attention. "And I make sure that the next time someone spills coffee in your elevators, they understand that cleaning it up isn't beneath them, it's their responsibility." Over the following weeks, changes began to appear throughout Morrison Industries. Small changes at first, policies about personal responsibility and workplace respect that seemed to emerge from executive discussions no one could quite trace. The employee handbook was updated to include language about maintaining shared spaces. Department heads received guidance about acknowledging the contributions of support staff. Recognition programs expanded to include workers whose contributions had previously been invisible. Marcus noticed these changes but said nothing about their potential connection to his encounter with the CEO's daughter. He continued his work with the same dedication and pride he had always brought to it. But now he occasionally caught sight of Sarah Chen in the building, moving through the space with a different kind of attention than other executives showed. She would nod when their paths crossed, an acknowledgement that carried the weight of shared understanding. Months later, when Morrison Industries announced a new initiative to improve workplace culture and employee recognition, few people connected it to the day a janitor had forced a woman to clean elevators as punishment for spilling coffee. But those who had witnessed the encounter began to understand that sometimes the most important lessons happen in the space between authority and accountability, in the moments when people choose to see each other as human beings deserving of respect regardless of their position in the hierarchy. Sarah kept the business card Marcus had returned to her, now slightly worn from his handling, as a reminder of the day she learned that true leadership began with understanding the dignity of all work and the people who performed it. And Marcus continued to maintain the building with the same meticulous care he had always shown, knowing now that at least one person in the executive suite understood exactly what that maintenance required and why it mattered.